Thank you so much, Viviana. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and it's also a great opportunity to share with you some of the activities that we are developing in our lab in making non-human, well, forms of intelligence. So we work on bio-inspired robotics. I mean, we take inspiration from nature, and then we take into account the different skills or capacities, I mean, from human beings or even living beings to adapt to changing situations. Then we use these principles to create new robots at the service of mankind. So before taking a deeper dive into this beautiful world, showing you the applications we have for these robots, well, I have a question for you, which is usually a question, I have for myself. Would you like to be an oak or a lion in your second life? Now, because you are forced to make a choice, so well, I think lion, right? Because, the lion is the symbol of passion, force, strength, courage. How many books have been written on lions? We have plenty, of sayings on lions. William Shakespeare said, well, a lion, of course, can have a specific expression, but once again, there are many other smaller animals around, so they are the kings of the kingdom of animals. Well, personally, I would say oak, because plants give us much more than strength and courage. Plants give us life. No plants, no life on Earth. And, well, of course, I'm talking about planet Earth. So they have colonized the mainland more than 450 million years ago. Homo sapiens appeared on Earth around 200,000 years ago only. So you understand they have had a long time to adapt themselves and to express different forms of adaptation. So let's make a sort of a comparison between animals and plants. Well, you can see that they are different now. Plants have a modular organization. I mean, plants' structures are redundant, so they are sort of repetitive. This is fundamental because they are much more robust, more resilient. They really colonize extreme environments. I think that the, well, even more interesting point of view, I mean, from our own perspective, and by the way, this is what we try to mimic, plants grow for their entire life. So, and they do this in the extreme parts of their body, so roots, but also the canopy. And they add cells, so the totipotent cells, or stem cells. They split and differentiate. So also a tree, a 1,000-year old or 2,000-year-old tree is basically always young, right? So they keep growing. And they adapt their body and morphology to the environment. So they're very plastic, so to say, high level of plasticity. They shape their body based on the, well, stimuli they got from the world. So all of this, well, this is what we are implementing in our robots: movement, perception, distributed control, energy efficiency, and networking. Now, let's see what happens today and what happened in the past in terms of perception of plants. We think plants are passive organisms, so they are not able to move or to perceive the environment around them. Well, this perception, or this sort of cliche, if you will, well, this is deeply rooted, once again back to roots. So this is deeply rooted in, antique times. I mean, this is Aristotle in the De Anima. So he describes plants and he says there's a vegetative soul. Plants don't move, so they don't need the sensory skills. But this is what animals have, and at the same time, intellectual capacities or skills when talking about human beings. Well, let's take again a deep dive in history. There are so many cliché or commonplaces in terms of plants. There are plenty of them in books. I'd like to talk about this example. Now, this is John Ellis. Now, John Ellis is a person, with a great passion for plants and carnivorous plants. So this is the T. Sipula. This is a carnivorous plant that you know very well. So it closes its leaves when there's a potential prey touching at least two of these little stings inside the leaf. And the distance between 1 and 2 is 30 seconds. This is a built-in control. This is really built into the plant. So this means that the prey stays within the two leaves. And this is really important for these plants. These plants live in environments with almost no nitrogen, so they take nitrogen from animals. Let me now go back to John Ellis. Now, John Ellis describes this phenomena, so this plant's closing or trapping leaves. Now, he couldn't measure, but this is just less than 1 second. This is due to Linnaeus, a great scientist, and then he classifies living beings still in use. This is a perfect rat trap. But Linnaeus responds in a very, kind of lukewarm way. The idea of an insect-eating plant is ridiculous. Now, this is contrary to the rules of nature given to us by God. So it sort of switches off all of these, scientific studies where the plant is not just a source of food or ornament for our homes, but this is something more. It's an individual or an organism. Now, Charles Darwin wrote beautiful books on plants, on movements, intelligence, and then on many different types of plants. Now, many years ago, he sort of wrote to the followers of Linnaeus. So he wrote this book, and he talks about insectivorous plants, which is a little, weaker. But anyway, this book will be a very successful one. So what are the reasons behind this? Well, I've studied plants for many different reasons, but also artificial systems. Well, I think that one of the key problems is the lack of perception of movements made by plants. Either they are too slow for us, so we have to speed them up, or they are too quick and we have to slow them down. So this is a lack of perception of what a plant can do in its environment, and we think they are inferior beings. So this is why we have these commonplaces and prejudices. This is something I had to face when, for the first time in the world, I offered plants as a robotic model to create independent robots getting into, underground for soil monitoring in terms of agriculture, farming, and pollution. At my third attempt, I got this European fund opening a brand new line of research on plant-inspired robotics. Well, actually, plants do move. They do this all the time. And basically, they do this when they grow. So they adapt their body. Now, this is not a random growth. They do perceive the environment around them. They have a distributed control right into the roots. So sensory skills or capacities. So they grow away from environmental stimulus. And once again, they do networks. This means they exchange information. I will tell you how in a minute. They will do this thanks to major symbiotic actions with other organisms. Now, this is our model. We started from the roots. There are many organisms, living underground. Roots are the best adapted plants to live in this environment, which is an extreme one. You have plenty of friction, plenty of pressure. If you don't necessarily have to go too deep, but this is fundamental for the quality of all ecosystems. In the soil, you find plenty of biodiversity. So how do they move? Where they grow from the tip, so there's a cellular split, they absorb water, they push the tip into the soil, but the tip only, so they reduce friction. Once again, they also have perceptive capacities, humidity, and then they avoid obstacles, chemical substances, and so on and so forth, and they create networks. You can see here one of the robots we made. We have translated, this concept, movement in growth in a robot which is able to grow. So we add new artificial material. We have miniaturized a 3D printer in the head of the robot. There's a sort of, this is a motor pulling a filament, a thread made of thermoplastics. This material, when heated, is sort of sticky, and then layer after layer, the Robo creates its body. The direction of the growth is given by the sensors and by the tropisms, which are the, once again, plant-inspired, the root-inspired mechanisms. So the Robo, let's say, shies away from an environmental stimulus. You can also see passive features when it comes to adapting to an environment. The root adapts its body to the environment around it. We have exploited the features of the material, so if it's not very solid, the body adapts to the environment. The plant does much more than this because in case of gradient, curves are required. So there will be more cells on the one side, so it's a differential growth. We have implemented the same behavior in the Robo by controlling the speeds, the growth speeds, and also the layering. Here you have another organism. This is once again a worm. So this is a worm we are studying to create soft robots for soil exploration purposes. This is interesting. Just observe the root and the worm. Moving into the soil, you can see that the adaptation strategies look quite similar. Even if this worm, of course, it has liquid inside and muscles, but it just moves to the first segments in the soil by contracting muscles selectively, pushing the head and then retracting the body. So this is how it manages, the pressure or friction problem. And the same movement is performed by the root. So the environment we live in has a major impact on our adaptation skills, also in terms of behavior and morphology. Now, intelligence, well, we can say intelligence, we can also call it or define it distributed control. So the fact of adapting to an ever-changing environment, solving complex problems. That this is what plants have been doing for so long. It perceives plenty of stimuli at the same time, making decisions on how to grow and where to grow. Priorities are given to some key factors. The priority is dynamic, so we have implemented the same dynamic balance in our robots. What can we do with these robots? Well, we can explore the soil, so we can go underground for farming purposes. This is a project from Tuscany. We had to monitor temperature and humidity in the soil, but depending on the sensors, we can also measure other parameters, for example, pollutants in the soil. This is another interesting point. We use robotics also to better understand biology, and in my opinion, this is one of the challenges of the future. Now, in this very case, we carried out a comparative analysis between two identical systems. One is pushed, from upwards, the other one grows from the tip. We saw that in the latter, the system is much quicker and it doesn't use the same quantity of energy. So the Robo, of course, is not a root, but we used a tool moving in the same, underground. So this is the future. So the Robo will validate ideas or hypotheses in science or biology. So we do this, we create the robots growing underground. This is another European project. So this is a completely different world. Look at these plants. They climb up, right? So in this case, the robot has to go against against gravity. So there are plenty of solutions that we are implementing. The inspiration is exactly climbing plants because they don't have a sophisticated trunk. So this is they use most of the energy to grow much more quickly versus towards the light. But of course, they have to create a sort of thorns or sort of sticking systems. This is vine. We also want to understand how they manage to get a supporter without using sites. So, in many climbing plants that live in environments with plenty of other trees, when they are very small, there's no light from the sky. So they perceive shadow at the very beginning. So they perceive the presence of other plants. They move to other plants, so they grow all around the trunk, then all the way up. When they see the light, they turn into phototropic systems. So we would like to implement the same behavior also in our robots. They can explore the world with no cameras, with no webcams, as we say today, with no sight. Okay, once again, distributed control or intelligence in plants, but what about animals? Now, here we have an incredible model. So it's a great animal. We've been studied for years, octopus. You know, it's a mollusk, it's a cephalopods. It has no stiff structures, no skeleton, so it can contract its body and then go through small holes with 8 arms, so they can be, bent or extended in every direction. It depends on how muscles are organized. It can become very long. I mean, this arm can become 70% longer than the length at rest. Co-contracting muscles, it becomes very rigid or strong. We are interested into the distributed control of the octopus. Most neurons of the octopus are contained in the 8 arms. Even if there's a high sophisticated brain, if you count the number of neurons, it's very similar to the number of neurons a dog has. Why is it so important to have distributed control? Well, biology doesn't tell us, but possibly, and because of the complexity of the body, with so much freedom and the freedom of movement, once again, arms can reach out. It's really difficult to control. So distributed control does help. These are some studies from neuroscientists that have studied octopus with us. So when the arm is sort of launched out, this is the reaching movement. You can see that one part is controlled by the brain, but all of the, let's say, the reach out, if you will, the stiffness is controlled from the periphery. Okay, so roles are distributed. There's another thing we saw. We have created silicon cone, same density, and then with some seawater. We have accelerated with our wrist. Look at the movement of this arm, which is uncontrolled. This is very similar to the movement of the natural arm. This means that interaction with the environment is so important. We don't control everything. It would take up too much energy, so we trust the environment to do this. In terms of octopus suckers, they are also very interesting because they stick to every surface. So let me go back to biology. If you want to create an artificial sucker, we need to study the natural one. We discovered, unprecedented anatomical structures. Can you see this protrusion in the center of the sucker? Well, this means that it can really stick or, come off. Never described before. We also have found hierarchical hairs. We don't know exactly what they are for. Probably chemorecepting sensors. So they perceive the environment, but this is not for sure. We have used all of this info to have an artificial model of the sucker with materials that have similar mechanical properties similar to natural ones, especially working in the water, so adhering to any surface. This is an example of one of industrial projects. The challenge here was to have a Robo moving in a constrained environment with a high pressure, with some dirt and oil. This is a new paradigm. This is the body of the Robo adapting to the object that has to be retrieved thanks to the use of suckers. Once again, we change the perspective here and the way they interact. Let me go back to plants. There's something more we are studying right now, and it sounds like philosophy. The plant goes over itself, beyond itself. It creates networks, as I said before, fundamental networks for its survival. So it perceives itself. The key word here is symbiosis. So roots, since they colonized, Earth, they started a symbiosis with mushrooms. Now, in this case, mushrooms are just like us, so they cannot create organic substance from an inorganic substance. So the plant gives sugar to the mushroom, but then the mushroom gives nitrogen and phosphorus and water back because they have extensions reaching out to where roots don't reach. So there's an exchange. Quite recently, and by the way, these are very recent studies, I mean, just started. So basically, plants communicate thanks to this underground network, which is a World Wide Web again. If a plant is attacked by a parasite or a pathogen, it communicates it to other plants kilometers away. If they can, they have to adapt protection systems. There's another recent discovery we are also working on. These networks are important reservoirs of CO2. They fixate the CO2, and this is fundamental. Well, you know that this is one of the GHG, so the greenhouse gases, so they increase the temperature on the surface of the Earth. Well, the most efficient ones are exactly those you find in cold climates. This means that if temperature, becomes higher, well, it would attack the symbiosis, which are so useful for us. So we would like to have robots that, in our opinion, can help us better understand how the underground network works. We are now creating virtual networks. So we study the connections between the fungal systems and the plant together with a new plantoid version, releasing substances to kick off the onset of symbiosis underground. To wrap off, let me talk about my dream. Well, we are working on this dream to hopefully it will come true. I'd like to have robots really being integrated into ecosystems. Okay, so we start from nature and we would like to go back to nature. So we're going to use the robots for exploration purposes or for the farming industry, but then they disappear because they are recyclable or biodegradable. So all of this is possible thanks to all of my colleagues. So we have people here from the four corners of the world, different backgrounds, an interdisciplinary group. Thank you so much for this. I also would like to thank funders, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. Grazie. Thank you.